3 sharp knocks rattled the front door, each one heavier than the last, echoing through the small apartment like a gavel striking judgment. I froze my pen, still hovering over a column of numbers on the ledger I had been reviewing for work. The silence that followed was almost louder than the knocks pressing against my ears, until I forced myself to stand. When I opened the door, the air shifted. My stepfather Victor filled the doorway, broad shoulders blocking the hall light, his cologne thick and suffocating. In his hand was a manila folder, edges bent, papers spilling out like entrails. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles twitch. $350,000, he barked, thrusting the folder into my chest. The impact knocked the breath out of me, and the papers slid against my shirt like knives. "Your sister's debt. You'll pay it by tomorrow." His voice carried no question, no hesitation, only command. Behind him, Madison emerged, my stepsister, clutching her designer handbag as if it were a lifeline. Her eyes brimmed with rehearsed tears, mascara smudging perfectly down her cheek. She looked every bit the fragile victim, trembling at the edges. Yet her shoes were new Louboutins, the red soles gleaming under the dim light. I stared at the folder, at the endless columns of numbers. Credit card balances, casino withdrawals, personal loans. And my stomach churned. Victor's finger jabbed the air inches from my face. "Family means sacrifice. You've always been the reliable one. If you don't help, you're betraying us." His words slashed through the air, each syllable weighted with contempt. Madison sniffled theatrically, her voice soft pleading. The contrast to his aggression, deliberate. "Please, Isabella, you're the only real sister I have." Real sister. The phrase hung there like poison, a cruel twist of irony. I wasn't his daughter. I wasn't even Madison's sister by blood. I was the outsider the stepdaughter brought into a house that never wanted me, except when I could be used. Memories surged, the sting of his hand across my cheek at 15, the sound of my name drowned out at my graduation. The nights I stayed up working double shifts to cover bills that weren't mine. And now here he was, again demanding, as if my life and labor existed solely to patch the endless holes of Madison's recklessness. My chest tightened not from fear, but from a clarity that burned hot and cold all at once. Victor leaned closer, his shadow swallowing me whole, his voice dropping to a growl. "Tomorrow noon. Don't test me, Isabella." I forced my lips to curve a faint smile that felt foreign on my face, brittle yet sharp. "Okay," I said simply. His eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering, but my voice betrayed nothing. He shoved the folder harder into my arms, then turned, gripping Madison's elbow as they walked away. The echo of his shoes down the hallway was a drumbeat of finality. When the door shut, silence collapsed around me again. My hands trembled slightly as I laid the folder on the table, papers spilling like a crime scene. My pulse thundered in my ears, but beneath the adrenaline was something else. Calm, deliberate, icy resolve. I had agreed, but not in the way he thought. I would not give him a cent. I would not stand at noon tomorrow with a check in my hand and tears in my eyes. No, I would disappear without warning. And when the dust settled, it would not be me left exposed. It would be him. The folder lay open on my kitchen table, its contents spilling out in a chaotic heap. Loan statements overdue. Notices, even casino receipts that reeked of desperation. I stared at the mess until the words blurred not from tears but from the searing clarity of what I had already decided. I would not be their savior. I would not bleed out again for people who had treated me as disposable. My phone buzzed, snapping the silence. A message from Madison lit up the screen. "Thank you for doing this, Izzy. You're the only real sister I have." The words felt oily crawling across my skin. Real sister. She had mocked me with that phrase earlier. Now she wielded it like a dagger coated in sugar. I typed back slowly, each word deliberate, each letter a nail in the coffin of her expectations. "I'll be there, don't worry." Within seconds, the 3 dots appeared. Then her reply. "You don't know what this means to me. I'll make it up to you someday." I nearly laughed, the sound catching in my throat. Madison never made good on anything. Promises from her were like smoke, visible for a moment, then gone. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Victor's name flashed across the screen. I let it buzz twice before answering, forcing calm into my voice. "Yes." His tone was clipped sharp, the edge of command never dulled. "Tomorrow, noon. Bring the check to Café LaRue. Don't make me wait." The line went dead before I could reply. My hand tightened around the phone until the plastic creaked. I set it down carefully, exhaling slowly. He thought he had me cornered, thought his threats were chains binding me to their demands. But he didn't know I had already begun cutting through those chains years ago. One receipt, one document, one hidden copy at a time. That night, I pulled out a small, fireproof box from beneath my bed. Inside were folders labeled in neat handwriting. Bank statements, old texts, photographs of bruises fading from purple to yellow. I traced the edges of the folders, my pulse steady, no longer racing. This wasn't panic. This was preparation. I began adding the fresh evidence. Madison's reckless gambling debts, Victor's voicemails dripping with disdain, screenshots of transfers I'd been forced to make on their behalf. Each piece slid into place, like a puzzle finally coming together. I locked the box and slid it back into its hiding spot, then turned to my suitcase. Clothes, folded toiletries, packed passport, tucked into a side pocket. My hand lingered on the zipper, my reflection faint in the darkened window above the sink. I had told them I'd be there tomorrow, and I would, just not in the way they imagined. As midnight crept closer, I sat in the quiet hum of the apartment, the weight of years pressing down and lifting at once. Tomorrow their performance would play out as planned. Victor looming, Madison trembling, both expecting the reliable stepdaughter to deliver salvation. But the curtain would rise on a different act, one they had never rehearsed for. They wanted compliance. I would give them a disappearing act. The morning light crept in through the blinds, slicing the room into pale bars of gold and shadow. I sat at the edge of my bed, suitcase half-zipped beside me. The low hum of the refrigerator, the only sound in the apartment. My body felt strangely light, like every muscle had decided to stop trembling at once. Fear had burned itself out, leaving only resolve behind. I reached for the manila folder Victor had slammed into my chest. The papers inside still smelled faintly of his cologne, bitter and overwhelming. I leafed through them one last time, loan sharks, casinos, luxury stores, and then closed the folder with deliberate slowness. Their mess, their chaos, no longer mine. My hands moved on instinct. I tucked the essentials into the suitcase laptop charger, a pair of sturdy shoes, the navy blazer I wore to client meetings. In a separate pouch, I slid my passport, birth certificate, and a checkbook with only my name on the account. Every motion was measured, silent like a ritual cleansing. On the counter, the fireproof box sat where I had placed it last night. Its weight was reassuring, the steel edges, it's cool against my fingertips. Inside it lay years of quiet resistance, photos of bruises on my arm when I was 17, texts where Victor had called me useless and ungrateful, receipts from thousands I had paid toward Madison's reckless spending. Each artifact was a truth they had tried to bury under gaslighting and control. I closed the lid, turned the key, and whispered, "You can't erase me anymore." My phone buzzed again, another message from Madison. "We'll be there early, sis. Dad says don't be late." The word Dad twisted in my chest like a blade. He had never been my father. He had been my jailer, my warden, the man who reminded me at every turn that I was tolerated only because I was useful. I didn't respond. Instead, I powered the phone down and slipped it into the suitcase. Silence filled the space where their voices usually echoed in my head. It was startling, then soothing. I glanced at the clock. 8 hours until noon. 8 hours until I would no longer be bound by their threats. I opened the apartment door and stepped into the hallway. The air smelled faintly of cleaning solution and coffee from a neighbor's pot. My footsteps were steady as I carried the suitcase down the stairwell. Each thud against the steps, a quiet declaration: I am leaving, not running, leaving. Outside, the morning sun felt sharp against my skin, the sky too blue for the storm that brewed behind me. I hailed a cab, my voice calm, as I gave the driver the name of a hotel across town. When we pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back at the building. The city opened before me, alive with possibility. For the first time in years, I realized the decision was mine. The cab's hum and the muted blur of the city through the window pulled me back into memories I had long tried to bury. It was never just about money. It was never just about debt. It was about control, humiliation, and the way Victor had carved his authority into me like a brand I could never scrub off. I was 15 the first time he hit me. The kitchen smelled of burnt toast and cheap coffee. Madison had been the one to leave her plate on the table, crusts, uneaten milk spilling onto the floor. Victor stormed in, demanding to know who had left the mess. Before I could even speak, Madison pointed at me. "Isabella didn't clean it up," she whined. The next moment, his palm cracked across my cheek, so hard I tasted iron. I stood frozen, tears burning as he growled. "In this house, responsibility means cleaning up everyone's mess. Don't make me remind you again." Madison smirked behind him, her lips curling in satisfaction. She knew then what I would learn over and over: he would always believe her. At 17, I worked weekends at a diner scrubbing plates until my knuckles split tips stuffed into a jar I hid in my closet. I dreamed of saving enough for college without loans. One night, Victor came into my room without knocking, the stench of whiskey heavy on his breath. He pulled the jar from under the bed, coins rattling. "Family needs this more than you do," he said, pocketing the bills and leaving me in the dark. Madison got a new pair of boots the next week. By 20, I had managed to get into community college, juggling night shifts and morning classes. Victor showed up one afternoon, paperwork in hand. "You're 18 now." "Sign this," he ordered. The paper was a loan application, thousands of dollars, with my name as guarantor. "It's for the family." He said the word family twisted into a leash around my throat. I hesitated, pen hovering. His fist slammed the table, rattling the lamp. "Sign it, or pack your bags." I signed. Madison used the money to pay off her credit cards, then threw a party the following weekend. Even my graduation was tainted. I was 24, the first in our tangled family to finish a degree. I had worked double shifts, lived on instant noodles, and studied in bathrooms when Madison threw parties in the living room. On the day of the ceremony, I scanned the crowd, heart aching for even a flicker of pride. Victor didn't come. Later, he said flatly, "Degrees don't matter unless they're real ones. Madison will get her MBA. That's worth celebrating." My diploma hung on the wall of my tiny apartment, a piece of paper I had earned through blood and exhaustion. Yet in his eyes, it was worthless. The abuse wasn't always physical. Often it was psychological gaslighting that made me question my own worth, my own reality. I remember being 27, finally managing to buy a used car with cash I had saved. Victor sneered when he saw it. "Don't fool yourself. That's not independence. You only manage because we let you." Madison laughed from the porch, sipping wine I had unknowingly paid for months earlier, when Victor had used my account to settle one of her overdrafts. Over the years, he perfected his control. Every accomplishment of mine was minimized. Every failure of Madison's was excused. "She's fragile," he would say, as if fragility were a virtue, as if recklessness and manipulation deserved protection. And every time I resisted, every time I tried to set a boundary, he would remind me of my place with words that cut deeper than fists. "You're not blood. You're lucky we kept you." The worst memory surfaced as the cab slowed at a red light. I was 29, sitting in the living room when Madison staggered in mascara-streaked credit card bills clutched like weapons. Victor looked at me. "Not her. Fix this," he barked. I tried to protest, but Madison wailed, "Please, Izzy, don't let them take my apartment." I felt cornered, the weight of their expectations crushing me, until I gave in, draining my savings to cover her rent. That night, as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, I realized the pattern every solution I offered only built stronger chains for me. The cab rolled forward, the cityscape sliding past. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, closing my eyes. Every bruise, every stolen dollar, every silenced victory burned through me. Victor had used fear, shame, and guilt to control me. Madison had weaponized weakness, her fragility, a mask for entitlement. And me, I had been complicit, too quiet, too obedient, too willing to trade my sanity for peace. But no more. Those memories, once suffocating, now fueled me. They were the receipts, the evidence etched into my very skin and soul. I wasn't running from them. I was carrying them like weapons. For years they had forced me to clean up their messes, to sacrifice while they thrived. This time I would clean house on my own terms. This time the chaos would be theirs to drown in. At the hotel room, the beige curtains drawn tight against the morning sun, I spread my documents across the bed like a general laying out maps before battle. For years I had squirreled away copies, backups, small acts of quiet rebellion. Now each piece became a weapon, and the war was no longer just survival, it was strategy. The first call I made was to Denise, my former college roommate turned attorney. Her voice was crisp alert, even though it was barely past 7. "Isabella, what happened?" she asked, hearing the strain in my voice. "My stepfather is coming after me again. He wants me to pay Madison's debts, $350,000. I need everything locked down. No more open doors." There was a pause, then the sound of typing. "All right, we revoke every power of attorney you ever signed under duress. We'll freeze joint access on accounts and flag any suspicious attempts at withdrawal. And Isabella, this time we document everything. Every bruise, every receipt, every threat. No more shadows." Relief flooded me, sharp and almost painful. For so long I had thought silence was my only shield. Now the silence was ending. By mid-morning, Denise had filed the revocation forms, her efficiency like a blade slicing through the bindings I had carried for years. I sat cross-legged on the bed, scanning through old files. Bank statements where thousands had vanished to cover Madison's rent. Loan documents with my signature shaky from Victor's looming presence. Even text messages where he had threatened, "Don't forget who puts a roof over your head." I compiled them into folders labeled clearly financial abuse, physical evidence threats. Then I called my bank, directly the same bank Victor had forced me to use when I was barely 18. The representative confirmed what I already feared: multiple attempts to access my account over the last week. "But don't worry, ma'am," the woman said kindly. "With the new restrictions, they won't get through. Your assets are secure." Secure. The word landed heavy in my chest. For the first time, the money I had worked for wasn't within Victor's reach. For the first time, Madison's recklessness wasn't my liability. I printed new statements at the hotel business center, the sound of the printer loud in the quiet room. Each page slid into the folder like a piece of armor. I added photographs, bruises on my arm from years earlier, a dented door where Victor had slammed his fist inches from my face. Evidence never blinks. Denise's words echoed in my mind. By noon, the groundwork was laid. Victor thought I would show up at Café LaRue with a check. Instead, I would show up only through paper and proof, leaving him no money, no leverage, only the mirror of his own corruption. As I zipped the folders into my briefcase, a strange calm settled over me. For years they had held all the power, and I had thought resistance was impossible. But the truth was, their empire had always been fragile, built on lies, threats, and manipulation. All it needed was exposure. I looked out the hotel window at the city, pulsing with noise and life. Somewhere across town, Victor was rehearsing his dominance. Madison was practicing her tears. They thought tomorrow would be another scene in the same old play. But I had rewritten the script. This time, when the curtain rose, they would find themselves standing alone, stripped of their masks, and the audience would see them for what they truly were. And I finally would be free. The hotel desk was too small, its veneer already scratched, but it became my staging ground. I laid the fireproof box in the center, its weight solid and final. Around it, evidence spread in careful rows: photographs, bank statements, signed loan papers, text printouts. Years of humiliation now organized with the precision of an accountant the eye of a survivor. I started with the photographs. A picture of my arm swollen and purple from when Victor had shoved me against the wall at 17. Another of the dented doorframe he punched inches from my head. Each one slipped into a plastic sleeve labeled in bold marker, physical abuse. Next, the bank statements. I highlighted every transaction Victor had coerced me into making rent checks for Madison's apartment payments to credit cards she had maxed out on designer clothes. Even wire transfers he claimed were for family bills, but ended up at casinos. I stacked them into a folder labeled Financial Exploitation. Then came the texts. I had saved them over the years more out of spite than foresight. Victor's threats glared from the screen as I transcribed them onto paper. Don't forget who feeds you. You'll regret it if you say no. Madison's messages were a different flavor of poison, emotional blackmail wrapped in saccharine words. You're the only real sister I have. If you don't help, I'll end up on the streets, and it will be your fault. I printed every word, slid them into sleeves, and titled the folder Documented Threats and Gaslighting. The last piece made my hands tremble as I placed it into the box, a small USB drive. On it was the voicemail Victor had left just last week, his voice dripping venom. If you don't pay this time, Isabella, you'll learn what betrayal really costs. Hearing it again sent a shiver down my spine, but I smiled grimly. Tomorrow his words would echo in a place he couldn't control. On top of the neatly stacked folders, I placed a single handwritten note on crisp stationery. This isn't revenge, it's a receipt. Isabella. I stared at the words until my vision blurred not with tears, but with the satisfaction of finality. For years I had been forced to clean up their chaos, to sacrifice while they thrived. Tomorrow they would open this box expecting salvation. Instead, they would find the truth. I closed the lid with a soft click, turned the key, and slid it into my pocket. The box sat there small, yet impossibly heavy, containing not just evidence, but years of my stolen voice. It was no longer just my burden. It was their reckoning. As evening fell, I rehearsed the plan in my head. Victor and Madison would be waiting at Café LaRue smug in their expectation of a check. Instead, the waiter paid discreetly with cash, and a hefty tip would deliver the box to their table. The USB would play automatically on a small speaker. I had included his own threats ringing out over the clink of silverware and the quiet chatter of other diners. Strangers would look. Whispers would rise. Masks would crack. The thought of Victor's face, contorted not in control, but in exposure, steadied me. The thought of Madison's crocodile tears drying under the weight of her lies gave me strength. Tomorrow the world would finally see them as I had always known them to be. I slid the box into my briefcase, zipped it closed, and placed it by the hotel door. My suitcase waited beside it, ready to roll out the moment my part of the play was done. I would not linger. I would not explain. I would vanish. Tonight I allowed myself one deep breath, one moment of quiet triumph. For the first time in years, I was no longer the girl silenced, the woman cornered. I was the author of the ending, and the ending would be theirs to choke on. Café LaRue was the kind of place Victor loved. Polished marble floors, glass chandeliers, servers in crisp white shirts. It was where he staged his power, where he could sneer at waiters and tip badly yet still feel like a king. At precisely 11:45, he strode through the double doors with Madison clinging to his arm. She wore oversized sunglasses. Despite the cloudy day, her hair curled to perfection, her perfume announcing her before she even sat down. They chose a table near the center, visible to everyone. Of course they did. Victor checked his gold watch, lips tightening. "She knows better than to keep me waiting," he muttered. Madison pouted, rehearsed and deliberate. "She'll come. She always does." At noon, a server approached their table, carrying a small nondescript box. "From Miss Isabella," he said smoothly, placing it in front of them. Victor frowned. "Where is she?" "She asked me to give this to you, sir." The server retreated before Victor could press further, disappearing into the swirl of tables. Madison's fingers trembled as she reached for the box, but not with fear, with anticipation. She was certain it contained a check salvation neatly packaged. Victor flipped the latch open with a grunt, pulling away the lid. Silence fell over their table. Instead of money, neatly organized folders stared back. The top sheet in Isabella's clean handwriting read, "This isn't revenge, it's a receipt." Victor's face darkened. He rifled through the contents, photographs of bruises highlighted, bank statements, texts printed in black and white, all damning. Madison leaned over his shoulder, her mouth opening in disbelief. "What? What is this?" Before Victor could answer, a soft chime came from inside the box. The USB drive connected to the portable speaker Isabella had planted clicked on. And then his voice filled the cafe. "If you don't pay this time, Isabella, you'll learn what betrayal really costs." The words boomed louder than the clinking glasses, louder than the murmured conversations. Heads turned. A woman at the next table, stiffened eyes narrowing. A man across the room lowered his newspaper, watching. The recording played again, Victor's threat unmistakable. Gasps rose, whispers fluttered through the air. Madison's cheeks burned crimson beneath her makeup, her carefully crafted fragility unraveling. "Turn it off," she hissed, fumbling with the box. Victor slammed the lid shut, but it was too late. Dozens of diners had heard. The manager approached, polite but firm. "Sir, is there a problem?" Victor's jaw worked furiously. "No," he snapped, pushing the box away, as if it were a snake ready to strike. But the damage was done. His authority, his control had crumbled in the span of minutes. He could command Isabella in private, but he could not silence her evidence in public. Madison yanked the sunglasses off her face, her mascara already smudging. "She set us up," she hissed, voice cracking. Victor glared at her, the mask slipping from his features. "Shut up," he barked, but his hands shook as he stuffed the papers back into the box. Around them the cafe hummed with low murmurs. Judgment in every glance. The couple at the next table leaned toward each other, whispering. A server lingered by the counter, eyes wide. This was no longer just a family matter. It was a spectacle. Victor stood abruptly, chair scraping against the marble. "We're leaving," he growled, gripping Madison's arm, so tightly she winced. He stormed toward the exit, the box clutched under his arm, but not before several phones lifted, discreetly snapping photos, recording video. Outside, the street was busy with midday traffic. Victor shoved the box into the back seat of his car, his face red with fury. Madison slid in beside him, tears streaking down her cheeks. "What are we going to do?" she whispered. Victor didn't answer. He slammed the door. started the engine and roared into traffic. But no amount of speed could outrun what had just happened, because while he was trying to bury the evidence back in the box, Isabella was already gone, her suitcase wheels whispering across a terminal floor miles away. She had disappeared without warning, just as she promised. And Victor, for the first time in his life, had no control, only exposure. Back inside the cafe, whispers lingered like smoke. The note on top of the evidence echoed in every curious mind. This isn't revenge, it's a receipt, and receipts once handed out could not be taken back. The fallout began almost immediately, spreading like cracks in glass. That afternoon, photos and shaky videos from Café LaRue hit social media. Victor's voice booming from the speaker, Madison's mascara running the damning words. This isn't revenge, it's a receipt. Within hours, the local gossip forums lit up. By evening, small news outlets picked up the story. Prominent businessman caught in public debt scandal. Victor's phone exploded with calls. Business partners demanding explanations. Clients pulling out of negotiations. One even left a terse message that leaked online. We don't work with men who threaten their own family. His reputation, once built on intimidation and polish, now stank of corruption. At home, creditors circled like vultures. The debt Madison had racked up could no longer be hidden behind Isabella's sacrifice. Her luxury car was repossessed in broad daylight, neighbors gawking as men in uniforms loaded it onto a tow truck. The designer handbags she flaunted online became symbols of hypocrisy, commenters tearing her apart. Fragile, more like spoiled parasite, Victor tried to strong-arm his way back into control. He marched into the bank, demanding access to accounts he once siphoned from Isabella. But the teller, polite yet firm, informed him that all authorizations had been revoked. Surveillance cameras caught his face, turning scarlet as he shouted, "She can't do this to me!" The clips circulated online, captioned mercilessly, "Toxic stepfather loses it at the bank." Then came the IRS. The files Isabella and Denise had quietly submitted triggered an audit. Agents combed through Victor's finances, uncovering unpaid taxes, suspicious transfers, and hidden debts. A formal investigation was launched, freezing his assets. For a man who thrived on appearing untouchable, the humiliation was suffocating. Madison, meanwhile, found herself drowning in consequences she never imagined. Her employer placed her on indefinite leave as the scandal dragged their brand into the mud. Friends who once flocked to her parties vanished, leaving her with nothing but unanswered calls and the echo of her own sobs. She tried to reach Isabella with frantic texts. "Please, you don't understand. I'm ruined. Help me." But the messages went unanswered. Even their own extended family turned cold. Aunts and uncles who once indulged Victor's authority began whispering about his downfall, distancing themselves to avoid collateral shame. The man who had wielded control like a weapon now found himself isolated, exposed, powerless. One night, Madison sat on the curb outside their mansion, now half empty, as collectors carried away furniture. She cried into her phone, live streaming to a dwindling audience. "She betrayed us," she wailed. "My sister betrayed me." The comments were ruthless. "She owes you nothing. Grow up. Receipts don't lie." Victor tried to silence the storm with threats of lawsuits, but every lawyer he approached turned him down. "You're radioactive," one said flatly, and he was. The empire he had built on intimidation collapsed brick by brick, until only ashes remained. And Isabella, she was nowhere to be found. She had disappeared without warning, leaving behind only the box that detonated their carefully crafted facade. Victor could rage. Madison could sob, but the world no longer looked at Isabella as their scapegoat. The world now saw her as the woman who had exposed them. The montage of their downfall was not swift vengeance. It was slow, grinding justice. Every headline, every repossession, every frozen account was another weight dragging them under. For years they had forced Isabella to clean up their messes. Now the mess was theirs alone, and there was no one left to save them. 2 days after the cafe spectacle, I sat in a quiet motel room miles from the city. Curtains-drawn suitcase tucked neatly in the corner. My phone vibrated once, Denise's name lighting the screen. I answered, bracing myself. Her voice was steady, sharp, the tone of someone who knew exactly how to wield words like scalpels. "Isabella, I have updates. Sit down." I was already sitting, but my spine stiffened anyway. The IRS opened a formal investigation into Victor's finances this morning. His accounts are frozen. They've uncovered at least 4 years of unpaid taxes and several suspicious transfers. He's under federal scrutiny now. Her pause was purposeful, letting the words land. "They won't be able to touch your assets. You're clean, you're safe." Relief spread through me like warmth after a long winter. Safe. The word felt foreign, almost fragile, but I clung to it. Denise continued, brisk and efficient. "The creditors Madison's been hiding from are circling fast. Without you bailing her out, they're filing suits. Collection agencies are already repossessing property. I expect her to be personally bankrupt within months." I closed my eyes, picturing Madison shrieking as another car was towed away. Her crocodile tears drying under the heat of reality. For years she had drowned me with her chaos. Now she was the one flailing. "And one more thing," Denise added, her voice cooling into steel. "That voicemail, the one Victor left you threatening you. It's admissible as evidence. If he tries to retaliate, we'll use it. He knows it too. That's why he's quiet right now." Quiet. The man who once filled every room with rage, who barked commands like they were law, was silent. It was almost sweeter than any shouted apology. I whispered, "Thank you, Denise." My throat tightened, emotion pressing against words I hadn't spoken in years. Gratitude, relief, freedom. "You don't have to thank me," she said firmly. "Just remember what I told you back in college. Evidence never blinks. You've kept it. You've survived. Now you're in control." The line went quiet after we said goodbye, leaving me alone with the weight of her words. For so long I had been terrified of silence because it meant waiting for the next blow, the next demand. But now silence meant something else. It meant safety. It meant choice. It meant a life no longer dictated by Victor's threats or Madison's manipulation. I set the phone down and breathed deeply, the air filling my lungs without the tightness of dread. Their empire was collapsing, and I was no longer buried beneath the rubble. For the first time, I was watching it fall from a distance untouched. The motel room was still when the phone rang again. I almost ignored it. Unknown number, the kind that usually meant spam, but something in my gut told me to answer. I pressed the screen, and the silence that followed was heavier than any words. Then came his voice. Isabella. Victor. My grip tightened around the phone. The tone was different this time, lower, hesitant, as if the man who had spent decades barking orders had suddenly discovered he was mortal. I know I've been hard on you, he began, each word dragged through gravel. But everything I did, it was for family, to protect Madison, to keep us together. You have to understand. I let his words hang there, the motel clock ticking loudly in the background. Protect. He had shattered me with his protection. Keep us together. He had chained me to debts that weren't mine, to bruises I never deserved. Victor, I said finally, my voice cold steady, the way I had always wished it would be in those confrontations long ago. You didn't do it for family. You did it for control. There was a sharp intake of breath on the line. For once, he didn't have a rebuttal ready, no quick jab to knock me back into place. He tried again, weaker this time. I was raised to believe blood is loyalty. And you weren't blood, but you were reliable. You were useful. The word sliced through me, but instead of pain, it lit a fire of clarity. Useful. That had been my role, my identity in his house. Not daughter, not sister, tool. You just admitted it, I said softly, almost with pity. I wasn't family to you. I was a resource. And now that resource is gone. His voice cracked something I had never heard before. Isabella, you don't understand what they'll do to me. The IRS, the creditors, my name will be ruined. I could lose everything. I almost laughed. You already have. The silence that followed stretched long, broken only by his ragged breathing. Then he whispered, "What do you want from me? An apology." Fine, I'm sorry. It wasn't remorse. It was survival. The words felt empty, rehearsed like a cheap suit on a man who no longer fit the part. I thought of the years of silence after his blows, the countless nights he let Madison mock me, while he smirked from the shadows, the stolen paychecks, the way he had looked at me as if I were a servant in my own home. You don't get to rewrite what you did. I said, my voice cutting clean. This isn't about what I want. It's about what you earned. And you've earned every consequence you're living right now. His breathing grew ragged, desperation seeping through. Isabella, please. I'm your stepfather. Doesn't that mean anything? I closed my eyes, picturing his face, red with fury at the cafe, his hands shaking as strangers watched him unravel. And I realized something. I felt nothing. No fear, no guilt, no obligation. It means this call is over, I said, and I hung up. For a moment, I stared at the phone in my hand, expecting my chest to be heavy, expecting regret to curl around my ribs. But instead, there was only lightness, a release so profound I nearly laughed. Victor's voice, once the soundtrack of my captivity, was now nothing more than static, fading into the distance. He had finally spoken to me, not as a master, but as a man begging for mercy. And I had answered with the truth. The first morning I woke without fear, felt almost unnatural. The motel bed was lumpy, the air smelled faintly of bleach, but the absence of dread was so strange, it bordered on luxurious. For the first time in years, I didn't jolt awake, wondering if my paycheck would vanish into Madison's overdraft, or if Victor would show up at my door with another ultimatum. My life was finally mine. I checked my email, half expecting threats. half expecting silence. Instead, I saw a message from Denise. The subject line was simple. Thought of you. Inside, she'd attached an article about a nonprofit that supported women escaping financial abuse. At the bottom, she wrote, "You'd be good at this. Evidence never blinks." The phrase made me smile. It had become my anchor, my battle cry. Evidence had saved me every bruised photograph, every highlighted bank statement, every recorded word. And now I wanted to hand that weapon to others. 2 months later, I stood in a small community center classroom, the scent of old linoleum and fresh coffee in the air. Folding chairs lined up in rows, a whiteboard behind me, and a circle of women with tired eyes but fierce hearts. Some carried children on their laps, some clutched folders thick with paperwork. All of them carried stories. I introduced myself simply. "My name is Isabella." For years I thought keeping silent was the only way to survive. But silence almost killed me. What saved me were receipts, proof, evidence, and the decision to finally walk away. Their eyes locked on me, a mix of skepticism and hope. I opened the fireproof box I had carried here, now no longer a burden, but a tool. I pulled out one photograph, one bank statement, one printed text. I didn't show them everything, but enough to prove the truth of what I was saying. Gasps rippled through the room. Heads nodded slowly. "This," I said, holding the stack high, "is power. It may not feel like it when you're trapped, when they're telling you you're worthless, when you're afraid to breathe wrong. But paper doesn't lie. Screenshots don't lie. Evidence never blinks." A woman in the front row whispered, "My husband drains my account every month." I thought it was just the way things were. I met her eyes, steady and unflinching. "It's not the way things have to be. Start saving proof. Every statement, every transaction. One day it will be your shield." By the end of the session, the women exchanged numbers, forming connections that hadn't existed an hour earlier. Hope flickered in their faces. For the first time, I felt not just free, but useful. Truly useful, not as a resource to be drained, but as a guide, a voice, a mirror showing others that escape was possible. Later, walking home under the fading evening sky, I passed a storefront window and caught my reflection. I almost didn't recognize her, the woman standing tall, shoulders back. Eyes clear, not the girl who once flinched at raised voices. Not the woman who signed loans under threat. This version of me was something Victor and Madison could never touch. Healing wasn't instant. The scars remained. But I carried them differently now, not as chains, but as stories. I could share proof that survival was not the end, but the beginning. For years, Victor had made me believe I was only as valuable as the money I could provide. Now my worth was measured in something else entirely: the strength to tell my story, the courage to help others tell theirs, and the unshakable truth that I had walked away on my own terms. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. Weeks later, I found myself sitting on the porch of a small cabin by the lake, the kind of place where the silence felt healing instead of hostile. The morning sun stretched across the water, scattering gold across the ripples. A gentle breeze lifted my hair, carrying the scent of pine. For the first time, peace didn't feel borrowed. It felt earned. On the table beside me lay a single postcard I had written to myself. "Boundaries are not betrayal." I traced the words with my fingertip, letting them sink in. Victor and Madison had called me selfish, ungrateful, even heartless. But walking away had not been betrayal, it had been survival. And survival had given me the chance to become whole again. I closed my eyes, breathing in the quiet. Their world was collapsing behind me, but I no longer carried its weight. My life was mine, finally and fully. If you've ever had to walk away from toxic family to save yourself, know this: you are not alone. Tell me your story in the comments. And if this one resonated, subscribe for more. Because sometimes the bravest thing we can do is disappear and rebuild stronger than ever.